Mark Few's starting lineup change not only paved the way for a blowout win over Oregon State on Tuesday, it just might have saved the season.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Thursday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Game Time. Folks, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Well, we haven't done mailbag in a while, so we collected up some questions from you all, some of them submitted on the Locked On Zags Discord channel. As a reminder, there's a link in the show notes to join the Discord. It is free, community of over 400 Zags fans hanging out, chatting every single day. Some of you submitted these via email. I collected up some old questions, threw them together here in a show. We're talking about Gonzaga's recent starting lineup change, Emmanuel Innocenti entering the lineup in place of Khalif Battle. We talked about the team's strange out-of-bounds strategy, if you can call it a strategy, against the Portland Pilots. We also talked about some of the latest Pac-12 realignment rumors, all coming up here on today's mailbag edition of Locked On Zags. We'll get right into it here. This first question comes from Austin via Discord, and it's worth pointing out that this question was asked prior to Gonzaga's game against Portland, certainly prior to Gonzaga's game against Oregon State. Austin says, quote, "Your quote, too many cooks in the kitchen got me thinking, what if this team is like a recipe? All the ingredients are amazing by themselves, but together the recipe just doesn't work. I'm not saying it is that simple, but is it possible that these pieces are just not right for each other? What are your thoughts?" Yeah, again, that's why I put out the caveat that this question was asked prior to the most recent games, because the recipes sure looked great together on Tuesday night at the Kennel against the Oregon State Beavers. I do think that this is kind of an appropriate time to talk about this question, though. It was something we discussed a little bit after the Portland game when Emmanuel Innocenti started in place of Khalif Battle, but in that situation, while Innocenti played well in that game, and of course Gonzaga rolled out to a dominant victory, Khalif Battle didn't really do anything. He played 16 minutes against Portland. He didn't score. He didn't even look to score. He was very deferential. He had a couple nice passes and offensive rebound. He didn't look disengaged necessarily, or he didn't look like pouty or anything like that, but he wasn't particularly active in that role for Gonzaga in that game. And so there was some optimism that Innocenti entering the starting lineup was good for Gonzaga in the sense that it gave them a new look defensively, that it was kind of a message being sent to the other players on the roster that, hey, your job's not necessarily safe. And then we see them roll out that same starting lineup, or excuse me, they roll out not the same starting lineup because Ike replaced Huff. He got a one-game benching basically for the technical foul against Santa Clara. But you have Ike and Greg starting, and then you have Nolan Hickman and Ryan Nembhard starting, and then you have Innocenti starting against Oregon State. And everything was cooking in that game. Everything was smooth. And it was against a team that Gonzaga struggled against just 12 days prior. So the changes that Gonzaga made very clearly had an impact on this game. Not the entire impact, being at home versus being on the road, different motivations, various other things that went into that. But in terms of this conversation, in terms of the recipe, in terms of whether the pieces all fit together for this Gonzaga team, I think they do. They just weren't being put together correctly previously. That's on Mark Few and the staff. They've made the changes. They've made the significant change that needed to happen. It is worth, again, exploring what exactly about this specific change has worked so well in a small 2-game sample size. My belief is that Gonzaga's original starting lineup, I guess original in the sense of the one that they've used the most often this year with Ben Gregg. They did have Michael Ajayi starting early in the year, but the lineup of Ike, Gregg, Battle, Hickman, and Nembhard has been not very good defensively, yet there's so many good offensive players in that lineup that what you see is Battle kind of having to be this third option, fourth option, at times second option, but he's not getting utilized at what he is best at. The offense runs through Nembhard and Ike. They run the two-man game, the pick and roll. They do the high-low stuff with Greg going to Ike. And Hickman's kind of floating around the perimeter looking for outside shots, but he's not really attacking. He's more of a catch-and-shoot three-point specialist. And Battle just didn't really fit in that offense with those players. We saw him settling for too many threes, which we were frustrated about. We didn't see him getting to attack downhill, do the things that we know he was so good at Arkansas. Well, here's the thing. 5 previous years of college basketball for Khalif Battle, he's come off the bench in about 65% of them. That's a role he's comfortable with. That is a role he is familiar with. And Mark Few has utilized a starting spot for a player who is very good as a perimeter defensive player, but doesn't offer much offensively. I've mentioned it a few times in the last few weeks or a few days. Mike Hart is probably the most notable example of this, but so is Kyle Dranginis, so is David Pendergraft. They've had players like this in the past. So Mark Few made the switch. And again, Battle didn't engage Battle in that game against Portland, but it sure as heck engaged him in that game against Oregon State. 23 points, 19 of them in the first half, and a horrid stretch in the last half of that half. He had the what was effectively a 5-point play, fouled on a 3-point attempt, made 2 out of 3. Ike got the offensive rebound, found Battle, he had a 3. 5 points in like a very short succession, 12 of 13 from the free throw line. He was a menace because he played a lot of his minutes alongside Dusty Stromer, who's a very good defensive player, but especially lately has been more limited offensively and is more of a catch and shoot specialist and not necessarily a playmaker. So Battle's kind of in a situation where he can be more of a playmaker. He can look to create his own shot. He's not kind of pigeonholed into a role where he's playing alongside Ike and Nembhard and kind of playing third fiddle to those guys. You put him in the second unit, you let him just go to absolute work, and it was phenomenal in this game. So I think to overall answer the question, I think that the recipe wasn't working, but it's not that it couldn't work. They just didn't quite have all the pieces in the right spot. And now we'll see what it looks like against St. Mary's. We'll see what it looks like going down the stretch. Gonzaga still got 2 games against San Francisco, the 2 games against the Gales. They got Santa Clara one more time. They got Wazoo on the road. Like, they got a lot of plenty of good games left, but I suspect we're going to see Gonzaga continue to try to roll this out because it really looked good in that game on Tuesday. Keeping with the food theme, Austin has another question here. Which lineup do you think should be your starter, your side salad, or your soup? Which lineup is your main course, meaning that's the focus? And then which lineup should be your dessert, the best lineup to end a fantastic meal? Well, again, I think we kind of saw this play out. The new lineup, the first lineup, the appetizer, the starter, Ike, Greg, Innocenti, Hickman, Nembhard. That's what we saw in this game against Portland, or excuse me, against Oregon State. It's what we would have seen against Portland had Graham Ike not gotten that technical foul. That is a balanced lineup. It's not the best it's not the 5 best players on the floor necessarily, but it's a balanced lineup. It's a great fit earlier in the game. It forced the other team. They have more defensive pressure on them because of Innocenti. It allows Gonzaga to run the offense through Ike more easily without Battle on the floor. It just works. The main lineup, I think, is where you have Battle in for Hickman, and depending on how he's playing, I think Stromer in for Innocenti. So that would be still Ike, still Greg, and then you'd have Stromer, Battle, and Nembhard. Very good offensive lineup. Stromer provides valuable defense. Again, he's been in a little bit of a slump lately, but when he's on, he's very, very good. That team gives you a lot of length. It gives you plenty of defense and still enough outside shooting, especially if Stromer's playing well, to kind of mitigate the loss of Nolan Hickman, who's a very good player and the best 3-point shooter on this team, but is not as impactful defensively, mostly due to his size. And then the dessert lineup, it kind of depends on team need. If you're trying to score, if it's the end of the game and you need to score a bucket, then you go Nembhard, Hickman, Battle, Greg, and Ike. That's the lineup that Gonzaga is rolling out as their starting lineup primarily this year, but that's their best offensive lineup unquestionably. And if you need to stop, if your defense is bleeding and you need to play a closing lineup to get stops, then I think it looks a lot different. I think it's something like Ike, Ajayi, Innocenti, Stromer, and Nembhard. Or if you want to get weird, you start Battle at the 1. Battle, Stromer, Innocenti, Ajayi, Ike has got a lot of length. It's got a lot of dogs defensively. It's a limited lineup offensively. You're probably just letting Battle and Ajayi go to work and try to create their own shot. It's probably not as advantageous in terms of getting Ike touches without Nembhard on the floor, but it's a lineup of dogs defensively. Final question of the first segment here comes from Jim on Facebook. Jim says, from a team perspective, is it better to have a player with a consistent 12 every night or have 2 games of 0 and then 2 high-energy games of 20 plus? Yes, the Khalif Battle question here. I think most coaches would prefer the consistency. I think teammates would probably prefer the consistency. I think you'd like to know what you're getting night in and night out, or at least not have it be such a wide spread between, hey, I'm not even going to engage offensively. I'm not even going to be looking for my own shot. I'm going to just take a handful of threes or not shoot at all, versus I'm going to go nuclear and score 19 points in a 7-minute stretch like Khalif Battle did on Tuesday. But I think if you have a roster that can kind of withstand those clunkers, those games where you're just not a part of the offense, for Gonzaga, obviously Portland, again, not a good opponent, but Battle does nothing in that game against Portland, and Gonzaga wins by 40. And then Battle goes out and has an amazing game against Oregon State, and Gonzaga also wins by 40 or 38. When you can withstand a player like that having a game, I think it's better. But I say the Khalif Battle experience because it's a reference to Locked On College Basketball, where I talk about the Caleb Love experience. Caleb Love, of course, the starting guard for Arizona, who has shot Arizona into games like he did against Iowa State when he hit a 55-foot game-tying three and then hit 2 threes in overtime to win. And he's also shot them out of games. He's had just horrible offensive performances that cost them the game. I don't think you want your best player. I don't think you want to live and die by a player who's as volatile as Caleb Love. But Gonzaga can withstand it with Khalif Battle a little bit more. So I think it works, even though I think generally most players and coaches would prefer the consistency as opposed to a player who's as volatile as somebody like Battle. Well, folks, the Pac-12, they're not letting any leaks out as they negotiate with media partners and potential realignment targets. We're going to discuss what we know and what we don't know coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, attending NFL playoff games and now the upcoming Super Bowl, that is an experience unlike any other. And this year, Game Time makes it even easier to create those unforgettable moments with their new feature, Game Time Picks. It filters out the fluff to show you only the best deals on great seats so that you can focus on what matters, being there. I used Game Time Picks to grab tickets for Purdue at Oregon for my dad for Christmas a few weeks ago. It could not have been easier. I found a super deal that gave me incredible value for these amazing seats. I could preview the view from my spot before buying, and the all-in pricing is a game changer. There's no surprise fees at checkout. Plus, knowing my tickets were backed by the Game Time guarantee gave me complete peace of mind. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, still rolling through mailbag here on a Thursday. Of course, we'll get you ready for that big-time game against the Gales of St. Mary's on Friday's show before that tips off Saturday evening, 8 p.m. In this segment here, we got 3 questions submitted by Jeff via Gmail, all regarding the Pac-12 media rights deal, conference realignment, everything going on with Gonzaga's new conference starting in 2026. First question from Jeff. He says, there have been reports the Pac-12 is close to finalizing a deal with Texas State, but that they are waiting to make announcements until they finalize things with all of their potential additions like Memphis, Tulane, and North Texas. Have you heard anything regarding Pac-12 additions? Also, in order for a new school like Texas State to be able to join in 2026, announcements will have to be made in the next 8 or 9 weeks or so. When do you think we'll get official word on who will be in the Pac-12 starting in June of 2026? Yeah, Pac-12 is keeping everything close to the vest. They're out at a summit right now. The ADs were all there, all of the current Pac-12 athletic directors. The presidents were meeting as well. They're having a lot of conversations, getting kind of together collectively, getting on the same page. We know that Pac-12 Commissioner Teresa Gould met with multiple media partners during the college football playoff weekend in that championship game. So there's a lot of conversations happening. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff happening. We're just not hearing a lot outside of rumors. Everything's a rumor. Texas State's a rumor. Texas State being finalized, and they're just waiting to announce it alongside Memphis, North Texas, Tulane, etc. That's all a rumor. It's all a rumor. Doesn't mean it's not true. It just means that as of right now, it is not something that we know definitively is the case. I think that's an important caveat to acknowledge. So right now, I think the Pac-12 is very intentional about making sure that we're not that they're not giving anything away, that they're not releasing information before they want it to be released. And it's something that they should be doing in this case because they don't want to frighten off any potential partners, whether it's media partners or realignment partners. So just kind of holding on to everything. You follow John Canzano, you follow John Wilner. They're both fantastic resources for Pac-12 coverage. Wilmer works at the San Jose Mercury News. John Canzano is a radio host in the state of Oregon. And both of them are giving you what they're hearing, which are just little snippets, just little small things every once in a while from unnamed sources. They have some projections, some of their thoughts, their predictions out there, but there's just not a lot of definitive information. So until we hear anything definitively, it's all just speculation at this point. Jeff goes on his next question. He says, what do you think about the potential addition of Texas State to the Pac-12? Yeah, look, Texas State's not a great men's basketball program historically or even currently. And so I think for the Gonzaga side of things, it's not great, but it's also not terrible. For starters, it's a fine addition for the conference. It rationally makes sense why the Pac-12, with considering the options they have, considering the resources they have, considering what we do know about their pursuit for conference realignment, for schools in realignment and for media deals, everything we know about that makes Texas State a solid, if unspectacular, addition for the conference. They're in the San Antonio area. San Antonio is huge, top 50 media market in the country. And look, San Antonio is not a city that is just chock full of Texas State fans. Like, let's not pretend that that's the situation. Whereas you look at like Reno, for example, it's this city that is much smaller than San Antonio, but also the majority of people in Reno are fans of the University of Nevada. San Antonio, I mean, there's UT San Antonio is already there. And then you have people who are probably Texas fans with Austin not too far away. And there's just so many other big state schools in Texas that Texas State is pretty low on the radar in terms of the fan base. However, it's a big school. It has a growing alumni base every year, and it's a media market that's going to generate interest from media partners. Even if Texas State itself is not a huge draw, knowing that you're going to have probably a pretty full crowd at football games, at basketball games, because of the media, the size of the place, you're going to get eyeballs on TV. Like for Gonzaga, getting to play in Texas every year is a positive thing. Kingston Fleming's one of their top targets in this most recent recruiting class who they missed out on. He's from San Antonio. You had games in Texas. You had games in San Antonio when you were playing Texas State. Maybe that helps you land a kid like that. Like, it has value for Gonzaga, even if the school itself is not a great men's basketball program. The football team's solid. Won 2 bowl games in back-to-back years, 8 wins in the Sun Belt each the last 2 years. Basketball team, they're doing all right, but they're not a huge benefit. Here's a reference. Day-by-day KenPom data should not be used to overall judge a program's evaluation for conference realignment. I acknowledge that, but this is just a good barometer for where Texas State is at right now. They are 159th at KenPom as I'm recording this. UTEP, Texas El Paso, and New Mexico State are the 2 schools directly in front of Texas State right now at KenPom. The school directly behind Texas State is Seattle U, a school many of you were very upset to find out is joining the WCC prior to Gonzaga's announcement about the Pac-12. So Texas State basically on par with Seattle U at this point. Cal Baptist, likely a backfill option for the WCC when Gonzaga leaves. They are 167th. For a current WCC reference, LMU 147th, so 12 spots ahead of Texas State. Far from the worst addition the Pac-12 could pursue. Logical for them for many reasons, but certainly not an addition that is going to be particularly exciting, at least not from an on-court perspective for the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Final question in the segment, again, another one from Jeff. He says, if the Pac-12 does end up with a media package that starts at 12 to 13 million a year, what do you think the odds are that the Pac-12 takes a shot at trying to get Creighton to join? Like Gonzaga, Creighton would probably have to be given a full share in media rights, even without a football team. 12 million in media rights payments is more than the about 10 million Creighton currently gets from the Big East. Travel costs would be noticeably less, and the basketball competition would be just as good or even better than most of the Big East. Lots of thoughts here. First of all, the question being, will the Pac-12 take a shot at Creighton? Sure, absolutely. I think they will. Why wouldn't you? The other aspect that Gonzaga is going to get a full share of 12 to 13 million, again, we don't know that. We don't know. The reports have indicated that Gonzaga is accepted a full share, but that has not been finalized. That has not been confirmed. We also don't know what a full share is. The question, if the Pac-12 has a media deal that's 12 to 13 million per year, would they take a shot at Creighton? Yes. Would Creighton accept it? Almost certainly not. Almost certainly not. For starters, the Big East deal is locked in. It's confirmed. The Big East status as a power conference, even without football, is fairly secure. They have a very solid media deal with multiple partners. They have continued to be on TV, and in their deal with Fox Sports has been very good to the Big East. And I think that it's going to continue to be very fruitful for them going forward. Beyond that, the travel costs noticeably less. Not really. Like, yeah, less. Again, I think this is maybe with the assumption that the Pac-12 is also adding Memphis and Tulane and schools that are a little bit closer geographically than Creighton, because right now, the current iteration of the Pac-12 plus Creighton compared to Creighton in the Big East it's not that different. Most of the schools are out on the West Coast. Most of the schools in the Big East are on the East Coast. Creighton right smack dab in the middle of the country. Just not a lot. Yeah, Utah's closer than most of the Big East schools, sure. And the trip to Utah and Boise, not as bad. But again, if you add Memphis and some of those schools that are a little closer to Creighton, that helps. But for right now, the offset of like maybe $2-ish million with noticeably better travel costs, I'm just not really buying that the travel is that big of a difference. And then the last point, I got to push back on that. The basketball competition in the current iteration of the Pac-12 is nowhere near the Big East. It's not even close. UConn, Marquette, St. John, Xavier as a top four compared to Gonzaga, San Diego State, Utah State, and Boise State. Big East wipes the floor with them. I mean, that is much, much better. Right now, UConn obviously is kind of borderline top 25. Marquette's top 10, St. John's top 15. Xavier has been in that conversation. They're not at that spot right now. Compared to San Diego State's not in the top 25. Utah State fell out. Gonzaga's not in it right now. And again, that's just a snapshot right now. But over the last 4 or 5 years, Big East is clearly better. And this is when we're not even talking about Villanova, who is one bad coach away from being back to where they were. Georgetown's growing. They're a program that has historic, incredible success, and they have a great coach in Ed Cooley. I think they're going to be back very soon. Like, the Big East is a significantly better men's basketball conference than the current iteration of the Pac-12. Even if the Pac-12 adds Memphis, it gets better. It gets closer. It's still not there. Maybe you add Memphis, and if every other edition is basketball focused, Memphis, St. Mary's, Nevada, which you probably take UNLV with, maybe New Mexico, fine. I don't think that's realistic at all for the Pac-12, but if those are the additions you make, you're getting kind of close. But if you're adding Texas State, if you're adding Tulane, if you're adding North Texas, you're getting farther and farther away from the Big East. I don't see Creighton leaving a conference that focuses on basketball for a conference that is focusing on football unless they're getting significantly more money or significantly more competition. And I don't see a reality where they're getting more than a little bit more money and less competition. Creighton's not going anywhere. I think it would be stunning if they were to leave the Big East at this point. Well, folks, Gonzaga has never had particularly creative blob or baseline out of bounds plays, but against Portland, they didn't even try. We're going to discuss what that was all about coming up in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Closing out the show with 3 more questions here for our Thursday edition of the mailbag here on the podcast. This next question comes from AD Simone 206 on Discord, who says, what do you make of the Zags tossing the inbounds into the backcourt on seemingly every baseline and sideline out of bounds play against Portland? A little unusual. Anything to make of that? Yeah, it was weird. It was weird. I was at the game with a buddy, and the first time they did it, we kind of chuckled because I made a comment of like, oh, Gonzaga's never ran anything particularly creative on those blob plays. They usually just might look for one action quickly, and then they'll just toss it up to Nembhard or Hickman standing up at the top of the key, and then they'll just kind of get into their sets from there. And then Gonzaga did it again and again and again. And every single time, I believe, or if not every time, just about every single time they had a baseline out of bounds play, Nembhard or Battle or Hickman or whoever would go well past half court, like pretty much to the other free throw line. And I think Hickman usually does the inbounds pass, would just football pass it as far down as he could. And then Nembhard would catch it and then just kind of come down the floor and they'd get into their set. It was strange. I am glad I'm taking this question now because I was curious if they were going to do it against Oregon State. Unless I missed something, I didn't see them do that a single time, which makes it even stranger. Why in one game against Portland did Gonzaga decide to not even attempt to run a single baseline out of bounds play and actively throw the ball very far down the court to get the ball in? Is it something about Portland's baseline out of bounds defense that they didn't like? Is it something about the Child Center that they didn't like? Is it something about, hey, we wanted to see if Nembhard getting the ball and kind of building some momentum coming downhill, coming into a set that way would be beneficial. We did see a few times where Nembhard would catch that ball and he would pick up speed coming downhill and then get straight into a pick and roll action or get straight into some kind of set. I have a feeling it's that there was something that they wanted to try offensively by maybe getting Nembhard, or I know there was a few times it was Battle, some momentum coming down the floor. Maybe they felt Portland was an opponent they could do it against because of the quality of opponent. Maybe it was something, again, in their defense that they felt they could exploit with Nembhard picking up some speed in kind of a transition type opportunity. I don't know. It was a bizarre thing. I don't think it's particularly notable. I don't think it's really matters, I guess, for lack of a better word. I don't think we're going to see them do it much more, but I am curious. I wish I'd been able to ask about that after the game, because it was just kind of a strange thing that I never really got a resolution on as to why that happened. Two more questions to close out the show. These both come from Aaron via Gmail. Aaron says, no offense to Portland, but as someone who doesn't know how these things work, my logic says a school in a big city should be better as a program. Do state schools, city schools, or private schools tend to have an upper hand in terms of money or success, or does it just depend on the school itself? Why does a school like Portland have a great alumni base? Could Portland be like San Francisco in terms of basketball success? Okay, the simple answer here is there's way more students who go to state schools than private schools. I mean, it's not even close. State schools have 45,000 students at a time. That means that they have massive alumni bases. More alumni, more people who donate to your program, more people who donate to your program, more money. It's not a lot more complicated than that, frankly. Outside of that, state schools like Oregon State and Oregon, we'll use the state of Oregon as an example, have huge fan bases of people who didn't necessarily go to the school. Most people who are fans of the Portland Pilots went to Portland. Gonzaga is a bit out of that, kind of not quite in that norm as a smaller school that has a bigger fan base outside of just alumni because of their basketball success. But most of the time, people who are fans of Portland went to Portland. People who are fans of Seattle U went to Seattle U, San Francisco, San Diego, etc. So when you have a much smaller alumni base, Portland has about 4,500 students on average, per year. So we're talking literally 10 times less students on any given year going to Portland than going to Oregon State or Oregon. So the alumni base is 10 times less people donating to your program. There are also just less sports fans because the programs haven't been successful. It's a vicious cycle. You can't raise money because people are not giving your program money, so you can't get good players. You can't generate interest in your program from a TV perspective. You can't get fans to come to your games. You can't get alumni interested in your games. Those alumni graduate, they don't donate to your program. Cycle continues. That's a boilerplate explanation, but I think it's probably the easiest way to explain why the situation kind of is the way that it is for programs like Portland. In terms of San Francisco, the reason they've had recent basketball success, they hire better coaches. It's not a ton more complicated than that. San Francisco has hired better coaches. They've had more consistent success. That has led to more engagement from the fan base. That has led to more money. That has led to the front office or the university allocating more resources to the athletic department. That has led to them building a new practice facility. That has led to more recruits wanting to go to San Francisco, because if you're choosing between San Francisco or Portland, and San Francisco's got a better facility, a better arena, better practice facility, better weight room, you're going to go to San Francisco. So then San Francisco gets better players. Then they keep beating Portland. Then again, cycle continues. That's really the main difference. It's more complex than that, of course, but fundamentally, as somebody who worked at UP for 2 years, who had friends in development, their job literally was to raise money for the athletic department at the University of Portland. I know firsthand how little money this school has to play with in this area and how much that cycle just continues to repeat itself for programs like this all across the country. Next question, final question here from Aaron. He says, how would you rank the teams in the WCC based on resources and ability to achieve resources? Where would you have placed Gonzaga before their long tournament run in 1999? And how much does making the NCAA tournament change things? Okay, this is my best guess at resources right now based on some data that I've seen. Some of it is a little bit outdated, but I've seen data based on how many full-time staff members these athletic departments have, how much money they have, things of that nature, based on endowment, which is just the total amount of money that these schools are bringing in via donations. So this is my best guess. Gonzaga, huge gap. Santa Clara, San Francisco, gap, smaller gap. St. Mary's, then Pepperdine, LMU, then Pacific Portland, then San Diego. I do not know if it is exactly accurate, other than Gonzaga has the most resources to play with from a athletic department perspective, and that San Diego is pretty much at the bottom. Those are the two things I feel pretty confident about. Everything else in the middle is kind of a guess based on what I know, but it's something in that range. In terms of where Gonzaga was at before 1999, all these schools were in way different spots. So it's kind of hard to compare them to the rest of them. Like Pacific wasn't even in the WCC at that time, for example. But Gonzaga was a school that was on the verge of looking to go D3. They were looking to lose their NCAA Division I status as an entire university because they didn't have the resources and the money to afford to continue to keep these programs at the D1 level, where there's more travel and there's more pressure and there's more, you got to pay coaches more, all that various stuff. So they were not in a good spot. I think they were still kind of in the middle, lower end of all these programs, because I think a lot of these programs were not in a great spot. And the WCC's growth and allocation of more money to these programs has helped all of them grow, in large part thanks to Gonzaga, which gets to the last point in terms of how much does making the NCAA tournament change things. Here's how it works. There are units. Every game that you play in the NCAA tournament, you get a unit. A unit is worth, as of the last time this data was collected a couple of years ago, $2 million, which is spread out over 6 years. That $2 million, which again is spread out over 6 years, is then allocated to all of the schools in your conference most of the time evenly. So we'll use the Big East as an example. Let's say the Big East has 10 games in the NCAA tournament. That means they get $20 million as a conference. That $20 million is spread across the 11 teams in the Big East. So whether you were UConn and you went to the national championship game, whether you were Seton Hall or DePaul, who didn't even make the NCAA tournament, you get that same amount of money over the next couple of years. That's not the case in the WCC. It used to be for a really long time. But Mark Few and Gonzaga, when they threatened to leave for the Mountain West back in 2017, and the WCC said, no, we want to keep you. What can we do? They said, we do not want to keep splitting this NCAA tournament unit money with a bunch of programs that aren't making the NCAA tournament. And so the WCC agreed to change their pay structure so that the majority of the money that is made from these NCAA tournament units is going to the teams that are actually making the NCAA tournament, which for a really long time was just Gonzaga. Now it's been more consistently Gonzaga and St. Mary's. And for a fun year in 2021, it was also San Francisco. But that was a change the WCC made because Gonzaga was unhappy that they were kind of carrying the conference and that schools like Portland and San Diego and Pacific were profiting millions of dollars off of Gonzaga winning a bunch of games in the tournament, and Gonzaga was only getting a 10th or 11th of that money. So that's a part of this conversation as well. That's why conferences like the SEC and the Big Ten, or even when the Mountain West had 6 teams in the Big Dance, that money gets spread out over those programs, and they have more resources to then, and now in the NIL era, buy more players or use those resources to beef up their facilities and things of that nature. Whereas, conferences like Portland or like the WCC, they're not getting as much money because only Gonzaga was making the tournament. Now they're not getting as much money because Gonzaga is not splitting it with them as evenly as they do in other conferences. And so they just don't have as much of those resources. For Gonzaga, this is why you jump the Pac-12. Pac-12, there's many reasons you jump to the Pac-12, but one of them, if Gonzaga and San Diego State and Utah State and Boise State and Washington State make the NCAA tournament, 3 of those teams win, the amount of money coming into the Pac-12 to get dispersed among those basketball programs is much more significant than it is when St. Mary's goes and loses in the first round, like they seem to frequently do as the only other member of the WCC making the Big Dance. Hope that helps. It's far more complicated than that. All of these conversations are, but it's a little bit of a glimpse into what that looks like on the back end for some of these smaller schools in the West Coast Conference. Thanks again, folks. That's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Again, I'll be back on Friday with a big old preview of St. Mary's, Randy Bennett, and the Gales. Recording this before they play Santa Clara, but we'll have a recap of that game on Friday's show as well, including what to look for on Saturday when these two teams square off. Thanks again. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And of course, as always, go Zags.